Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna work on building a deck. A super fast way to spend a weekend and enhance your outdoor space. So come on, let's do it. Okay guys, so first step in building our deck is determining the shape and the size of the deck that we want to use. So once we determine the basic layout, we set our posts, okay? So as you can see here, we've installed our posts for our railing that basically act as support for the railing as well as support for the deck framing itself. Each hole, we went down about 18 to 20 inches and about 18 inches in diameter. You can see here, we've embedded these 4x4 posts in fast setting rapid concrete mix. The trick with using these red bags of fast setting concrete is once you start mixing the water with the concrete mix, it sets up pretty quick. Now that we've got our posts set, let's recap how we achieved and found the location for them. We needed holes for our posts to sit in. In order to determine where the holes go, we had to run a string line up and past the footprint of our proposed deck. The string line goes up in both directions. Those string lines that we had up temporarily were 90 degrees in relation to each other. The way we found that out was what we call 3-4-5. So 3-4-5 is very simple. When you have one string line up and one string line going the other way, if you measure over from here 3 feet and make a mark on your string line, and then go the opposite direction and make a mark at 4 feet, the distance between those two marks should be 5 feet, hence the 3-4-5 rule. If it's not exactly 5 feet, then you know that something's not square. So that's kind of a trick that is important in laying out and making sure that you don't have problems with cutting your material and framing your deck later on. Where you'll notice it is when you set your posts and you start framing and building your deck, if stuff's not square and it's out, that's why, right? So you want to make sure that you establish that string line that runs parallel with one side and then perpendicular with the other, okay? And you can pull all of your lines or measurements off of that existing line that you've set. So we got Jordy over here. He's ready. He's ready to go. We're gonna build this deck. Okay, so materials. In this case, we chose Doug Fir S4S number 1 grade material. The posts that we're using are 3.5 inch square. We've gone ahead and pre-primed all of our material with primer. We've got 2x6 Doug Fir, which is what we're using for both our deck frame and our deck joists. 2x2 material is what we're gonna use for the railing. Next step now is determining the elevation and the height of our deck surface. I want to keep in mind we've got a couple existing conditions to work with, okay, which is pretty standard in most applications. What we want to do is we want to create nice transition from this walkway up onto the new deck. We need to determine from our entrance onto the deck what our elevation is basically doing. I've got a 6-foot level here, and I'm going to lay it down on the existing concrete to kind of see what's happening. If you take a look at this level, the concrete is sloping about 3/4 of an inch in 6 feet. So find your high point on your existing condition. Determine what is a comfortable step for the entrance into the new deck. In this case, we realize that there's a difference of from a high point to a low point is about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm gonna set my first deck board framing at 4.5 inches above existing. And as we get over here, it'll end up being 5.25, which is plus 3/4 of an inch. Then my decking material is gonna go on top of that and it'll go up 1.5 inches. So I'll be at 6 here and then we'll be at 6 3/4 here. We've got a laser pointer, okay? I'm gonna use an arbitrary point to set my laser on that can pan and reach every single post. The goal here is to establish my existing concrete all the way around. The reason why we're taking the extra step right now to take into consideration existing condition and step heights, etc., is because this is the proper way to build a deck with an existing setup, an existing layout. We want to make sure our deck is perfectly flat, perfectly level, perfectly code compliant, that it's anchored properly, and so that's the reason why we're taking this extra time to do that. So now guys, look. So right here you guys can see there's a little laser dot right there. I want to take that mark and I want to transfer it on every single post. Now I'm gonna show you a trick. Now I'm gonna turn my laser off. I'm taking one of these boards and I'm gonna set a nail on that mark that I made. Temporary nail. I'm gonna take my 6-foot level. I'm gonna put my board on it. I'm gonna set my level on my board and it says it's level right there. So we're marking the bottom. So it's the same idea as putting the laser out there. Now that we've got that, we can kind of run through and do the exact same.
Money mark.
We've got arbitrary, the key word here is arbitrary lines, establishing a level footprint all the way around every single post. So now the goal is to take those marks and adjust them to comply with what we're doing on our elevation step. Yeah. As you can see, guys, I just took this high point of our concrete, made a mark. I know I want to go 4.5 inches up from that. This mark represents the existing concrete. I want to make a mark at 4.5 inches. That mark represents the height of our new deck to be framed. We've got an arbitrary line that establishes a level point all the way around. The goal now is to take this measurement from here to here, find out what that is, and then transfer this new line all the way around. In this case, we'll call it 5 3/8. So 5 3/8 down is where the top of our deck is gonna go. 5 3/8. Jordy, you wanna finish these off? He's on the phone. Look. Yeah, he has a question.
Two-gang switch next to the
I'll mark them. See? 5 3/8, make a mark. The trick here, guys, is taking your time and establishing your elevations first. If you want a nice flat level deck surface that you're happy with, you've got to take your time and make sure that initial elevation shot is accurate, because everything hinges on that. We're creating the foundation for our deck. So once we establish that foundation with a little bit of time, then the production of the deck build actually goes pretty quick. So we did it. Now the next step in the process is to set our outside rim boards, our frame, so to speak. So in order to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna run a deck support that basically cantilevers cast on each side. So post to post, we're at 110.5. So I'm gonna come in, guys, we'll call it 4 3/4, 4 5/8. That creates the same distance or the same amount of overhang on each side. In this case, I'm using a battery-powered framing nailer. These are galvanized nails. So galvanized meaning they're coated exterior grade nails. This line that we've went around and shot represents the top of my framing. Okay, so I'm setting a nail. Simply set the board here. And now I'm gonna hold my mark at 4 3/4, which I made the backside. And the top of my deck board is gonna go plus or minus here. Now, if you'll notice, I'm sitting above my desired line. So in order to get this down to where I need, I'm gonna have to mark the deck board, and I'm gonna have to figure out how much I need to cut. A 1/2 inch too high. I wanna cut a little bit more. I wanna cut another 1/2 inch to allow for water or runoff or anything that comes from this existing concrete surface to have the ability to flow out. We've got our mark, that's where the concrete's gonna be. And we're gonna come up 1 inch. Okay? Cut there. Now I want to make sure we prime this, and we're priming this because, you know, we're not going to be able to get to it later. Ready to go. We notched our board, and there's our line. We're ready to go. Set one nail. We'll put a level on it to make sure we're good. We don't go too far ahead. Perfectly level. We can set another nail. First board is up. Now we're going to do the same thing down here on the very end and same thing in the middle to create our supports. So I'm running these deck boards a little bit long. Up. Mucho bueno. We're good. So now what we've done, guys, is we've kind of created supports that are tying our posts in together, as well as an outside support for our rim board. So the next step in this process would be to install our outside rim boards. All right, so let's do that. The outside edge of every post, I made a mark at 3 inches. That's where I'm gonna cut these. I ran these long. I'm gonna run 3 inches on each side. I'm gonna snap a line for the middle one. So this string line between 2 points tells us where we're gonna cut that middle one. I'm gonna flush out the back side of my deck with that elevation right there. From the outside post to where this transitions, 73.5. Come down 73.5. On this side, you can see, remember we want water to drain. From here to the top is 5 inches. I want to cut down to 4.5. And then on this side, 5.5. So 4.5 to 5. So 4.5, and that's 73.5, 5. We continue down to this point gradually, and then it changes direction dramatically. So at 101.5, we make a mark right there. That's where it dramatically changes direction. We were dealing with an existing condition, right? We had the existing concrete, which is kind of slowly sloping. But as we get to about right here, you can see that the transition is a little steeper. So to try and make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible, followed this blue line, which is the slope of the existing concrete, and then at that transition, it changes direction. So we tried to kind of conform to that as best we possibly could. I'm putting the outside board on facing the street. It's got a little bit of a crown in it, and that's because the board itself has a bow in it. So we're gonna try and get that out as much as we can by pulling up on it, making sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the finger in the process. The goal here now, guys, is we're gonna put our first board, our first deck board is gonna go right even with the outside of this post, 5.5 inch. In order to gain additional support, I'm gonna put 8-inch board here. So that's it. Looks like it's gonna work. So we're gonna prime it now.
Before we prime it, this is gonna be visible deck board. Super quick, I'm gonna set up my router. I'm gonna match the same bevel that all of these boards have going on it. It'll make the rip look much cleaner. So show you what that means. All I've done is I've taken my little 1/8 inch radius bit, I brought it to the edge, I'm matching the natural factory finished edge of this piece of wood on my rip cut. It just makes the line look a little softer, not so pronounced, and when we prime this and paint it and it goes in, it's gonna look much more professional. There may be a little on the
You made it look just like regular wood.
just like real wood.
So now we've got our outside rim up. We've got to do this one, okay? So here's what we're doing is we're installing what I would call like ladder blocking, basically small little joists that help support the outside edge board. So we're gonna put those in first, square them up to our existing board that's in, and then snap a line and cut them all off even so we have a nice flat surface to work off of. So here, guys, making sure you don't nail your finger, obviously. Keep your hand back. And just line it up and nail it. Jordy, what are you thinking?
I think I'll snap that line so I can start cutting.
Okay. As we install our ladder blocking, go through and just make sure that they're somewhat straight. So you can see right here, so the one we just put in is not square. So as we move it over, get it back to square, and then when we snap our line, it makes for better application or better installation. So we're gonna put a 4x4 post, another railing post, just for extra support, and I'm marking where it goes, halfway between our two posts. I'm gonna put a block on either side so it has good, strong support. You don't want the blocks to be too tight, because then you won't be able to get the post in, right? Yeah, I like them. Oh my God.
Inspect the job site. Looking pretty good.
Yeah.
What time is it?
This first outside one, we're gonna miter it. I'm actually gonna cut this back on a 45-degree angle so that the board intercepting it creates a nice cleaner as opposed to, butt seams. I'm gonna cut my first 45, and then from there, I measure and cut the other 45. So first one's finished. Now, guys, we're putting on that outside rim board mitered. We're gonna glue it. Gonna go in. As my son Gannon would say, this is very satisfying. Hi, Gannon. Now, do we want to come along, Jordy, and nail this? Yeah.
Jean-Claude?
I got you.
So as you can see here, guys, we put an intermittent post in between. We're gonna plumb it up and nail it off and screw it off really good. But we ran it long, right? All these posts are run long. We'll go back later after the deck is completely done and installed, and we'll shoot them all and cut them off even.
I am good.
Perfect. Yep. As we're plumbing the post up, we're using these big, strong lags for the deck. So Ben and Jordy are gonna work on that right now. Go ahead. I'm gonna start laying out for our joist now. So what we wanna do with our joist, we've got our frame in, right? We're going to measure every 16 inches, mark our boards where we're attaching our joist to. We're gonna follow the same layout so that everything lines up, all of our screw holes and nails. I hook my outside rim board and I just follow the same process that I did on the front. We'll worry about the ends later. Now this one in the middle, we're gonna put joists on both sides. So both sides get a joist and make sure we mark proper direction. The key here, guys, with layout is making sure that you take your time and that you don't put the X on the wrong side, which is very easy to do. I know it sounds silly, but I do it all the time. Now we've laid out all of our joists, you can see. We pulled from the same side. We pulled 16 from this end, 16 from the middle, and 16 from that end. So now we've got a uniform layout. Now the next step is to identify what we're doing on the outside edges with our deck boards. So here's what we're gonna do on our outside edges. We're gonna have our boards, our first outside picture frame deck board, basically sit like this. Okay, so it's gonna run like this. On the other side, it's gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna have a board that looks like that, and then a board that looks like that. In order to create backing or support for our field boards where they intersect our rim board, we need to put a joist or a support centered between this line and the post. So I'm gonna mark right here. This is where our joist goes, okay? So what I did here, guys, I kind of made like a little notch. I'll show you what this is for, but I made a notch, right? So it laps onto the post and it's centered. Prime this board, put this guy in, and then we'll do the last one. 7/16, 62 and 7/16. We're creating a center point, center support for both the outside picture frame board and the decking itself. We did backing support on that side of the deck that faces the street. Now we do the same thing on this side. So measure and cut. Some outside perimeter edge blocking in and ready to go. Now the next step is to measure and cut all of our joists. So hopefully they should all be pretty close to the same. What we're gonna use is hangers and hardware. So after we install the joist, we're gonna go back through and install Simpson joist hangers for extra additional support. These are LUS 26Z. The Z stands for allowable exterior use. If it has a Z on it, it means you can use it on the exterior. So now we're starting to cut our joists and put them in. To do this by yourself, put a little nail on the very end, a little hook they call it. Remember, we're putting joist hangers on later. So with the joist hangers that we're using, guys, joist hanger nails go into the actual support member, and then you use 16 penny hand drives or screws to go into the deck joist. So now this section of the deck, all the hardware's on, it's all nailed up. Now we're gonna go ahead and actually install these deck joists on this side and then repeat the whole process over again. Then we're ready for our decking. Putting these little facer blocks in to kind of help support intermittent posts that we installed. So now that we've got our deck posts and joists and framing in, let's do a quick recap before we start on the last and final phase of the deck structure itself. So if you remember back, we started with our posts. We filled them up with concrete, leveled them up, and then they were ready to go. We ran our dry lines all the way through in order to create our nice 90-degree angle. Then we moved to the deck structure itself. We started by determining our high point with our existing conditions. We ran our arbitrary line all the way across, measured down from there to determine the height of our deck structure. We then fastened our outside rim boards to our posts, and then we infilled with deck joists. Miscellaneous blocking along the way. We finished nailing up all of our hardware, and now we're ready to install the actual walking surface. Now we're moving on to the last phase of the deck structure itself.
All right, guys. Now that we've got our deck framed in, we've got the rough portion of our framing done. We're gonna start working on the actual deck surface. It's gonna be the finish or what you see. So what we see is gonna be this board on the outside, and then it's also gonna be the board that sits on top. The layout that we've chosen for this project is gonna be a picture frame application. It's gonna give us a nice border that goes around the whole outline of the deck, and then we'll be able to infill the deck boards from there. It's gonna make it nice and uniform and really pretty. So what we're gonna do is we've got a couple of existing elevations that we have to take into consideration. We've got a walkway that we don't want to exceed. So we're gonna have a board that sits inside this post line. For the outside edge, we're gonna have a full-size board on the outside of these posts, as well as a full-size board on the outside of this perimeter board. The same thing happens over here where John is. We've got limits on how far we can go past this deck. So what we're going to do is the same thing. We'll notch around these posts so that this board sits tight to the ledger. I'm gonna line those out for you and show you how we do it. Let's start with this one. This is gonna be the first board that we put on, probably the easiest one. What we'll do is we'll measure the outside of this post all the way over to the outside of this post. I've got 139 7/8. I'm gonna oversize that probably about a 1/4 inch. It's gonna give me an 1/8 of inch of play on either side so that when I come to make my miters line up, I can get everything really tight and I'm not fighting the board. So let's go cut that first one. So the first cut I'm gonna be making, guys, is the first miter or 45-degree angled cut that I'm gonna make for the outside edge. So what I've done is I come to the end of my board, take my speed square, I automatically got 45 degrees. I'm gonna set that line as a reference point, and I'm gonna show you a little trick. If you're not super confident in your cuts, you want this to come out really tight and you don't have like a chop saw or a miter saw, what you can do is you can use your framing square as a guide for your skill saw. When you push your saw against that guide, it's gonna stay at the 45 degrees. So all you gotta do is take your saw blade, line it up with the cut you wanna make, hold your speed square obviously tight to the board on the outside using the fence, and then when you make this cut, now we've got a nice, clean 45-degree cut.
Now we've got our board ready and it's in place. We're gonna fasten it. We're gonna use these 3-inch deck screws, okay? So they're actually specified for deck framing, exterior grade, but we got 3-inch because we're going through 1.5 inches of decking surface, and then we wanna get good positive screw attachment into our deck framing itself. So screws are a nice application and a recommended application for the decking surface itself. They just hold better over time. So as you can see, guys, here, we've got our outside rim board, and you see now where the joist comes into play, where we wanted to make sure it landed halfway on both our field boards, which are gonna be now coming into it, and the outside edge of our deck board. So pretty simply, now we can add a screw on an angle. We have positive support there on the edge, and then our new boards, our new deck field boards that are gonna come in, they're gonna also land and have support there. So that's the reason why we put those guys in.
Lots of room.
No, all right, Jordan, how are we looking? All right, so this corner's now good. Picture frame, we call that. What we're doing is we're creating an outside ribbon around the outside deck so that our field boards have a nice, clean application installation for finish. That's the idea.
What happens is now I've got this 4x4 post right in the middle of my 45-degree angle for my picture frame. So what I do is I reference my 0 point on the 45-degree piece that I have here. It's on the corner of the 4x4. So what I'll do on my new piece is I'm going to cut my angle, measure this 3.5 by 3.5 by 3.5. I'm gonna cut that material out of it, and then I'll slide it on and it'll fit nice and tight. I'll show you what that looks like. So I've transferred my lines. This is my 0 point on my miter, 3.5, 3.5, 3.5. That's basically my 4x4. I'm gonna cut that material out of this board, and when I slide it on, it's gonna fit nice and tight. It's gonna close the gap on the outside edge, and then I continue my pattern. Let's get cutting. Alrighty, there's my 4x4 post. Let's dry fit it and then prime it.
You don't know? Now that we've got our outside rim board pinned on that corner, I'm measuring the far outside corner so that we have the same dimension. So our field boards are basically the same. So I'm gonna hook my outside rim. I'm gonna go 118 3/4, and then I'm gonna nail it on. Okay, how are we looking? So as you can see, we notched around these posts. We have even spacing on each end, and we're ready to start running our field boards now. The hard part is behind us. In our field boards here, we'll kind of measure back and make sure that we're staying on track. We don't want to get off too far, right? So we're running field boards production-wise, but keeping in mind that this is finished detail work. So we'll kind of cross-reference and measure and make sure that we're staying square as we go. So maybe every 2 or 3 boards we'll check. Thanks, Jordy. Thanks, Jordy. As we're moving along, we're, 5 boards in, field boards. I'm checking, I'm at 34 and almost 5/8. Now I'm gonna check the other side. Hooking the outside, I'm at 34 and 9/16. So I'm within a 1/16 of an inch. We're fine, let's just keep rolling. To get a uniform space in between each deck board, I'm just using a standard speed square on edge and just sliding it in and giving all the boards the same space in between. Simple, fast, it leaves for, a nice clean look. So if you want a bigger gap, you could use something bigger, like a screwdriver or even a piece of wood. I mean, this is a nice size for that. As you can see, we've been running field boards here, guys. We came into a post connection. So we notched around our post with some precision cuts. And now we're back to field boards. So now that we've cleared the post, now we run field boards. 80 and 13. Yeah, 80 and 13. So what do you think, Jordy?
I think it came out pretty good. First day framing, not too bad.
Yeah, so we just wrapped up our first day of framing, guys. We talked about posts, getting our posts installed, talked about our deck framing, the actual support itself, and then now we finished the decking, okay? So all in all, not too bad. We've got to finish with our railing, which will be the next phase.
So we'll come through, we're gonna measure up, we're gonna cut all our posts to the height that we want. This design is gonna be a 2x2 horizontal post, so we'll get all the 2x2s cut to length. And next time you see us, we'll be installing the rail pieces.
Yeah.